Welcome to the Raiders Training Camp Podcast, presented by SiriusXM. Live from the Intermountain Healthcare Performance Center, here are your hosts, Jesse Merrick and Eddie Paskal.
Well, Raider Nation, we have made it to the end of training camp and the end of this show. Eddie Paskal hanging out with Jesse Merrick on our season finale of the Raiders Training Camp Podcast, presented by SiriusXM. Jesse, it has felt really, really long, but also like really fast at the same time, if that makes sense.
You know, as they say, like time flies when you're having fun, right? It's crazy. We were just talking before we got going. Like this camp, I feel like has had more breaks built in, at least for me. You know, I know you got to come into the office every day, but you know, some days where I don't have to come down here. So this one didn't feel as, you know, I think long as previous camps have for me at least.
Yeah, and I think that the schedule, I think, you know, big credit to Josh and the staff for kind of building out the schedule in a way where it did feel like we kind of had some of those natural breaks, right? We came back from the Hall of Fame game. You have a weekend. I think we had a weekend, not this past one, but the one previous. So there were these kind of natural breaks that kind of in the course of camp that you typically don't get. But all the same, I still feel like I haven't really known what day it is for about 4.5 weeks, but I wouldn't have it any other way. We just wrapped up, yesterday I should say, joint practices with the New England Patriots, something that we've had circled on the calendar for a very, very long time. I'm curious for your take because I don't know if surprised is the right word, but I don't know if I really thought that joint practices were going to go the way that they went. But like 2 days in, now we have a chance to kind of reflect and look back on what we learned. Like, what are your big top-end takeaways from the past 48 hours?
Like the first thing that honestly stuck out to me, and it really doesn't have anything to do with like the football itself, but just like how kind of chill things were, if that makes sense. You know,
100%.
like I expected, you know, we saw when they went to LA, it was very like, hey, you know, we're going to war here. Like we got something to prove, all this stuff. And not to say that this team doesn't feel like they have something to prove, but it was just very much a business-like, you know, respect between the two teams that we're going to get some good work in, we're going to compete, and boom. There was jawing back and forth, but no, you know, wild, like crazy things like we've seen in years past and stuff like that when the Rams have come to town and whatnot. So for me, it was just like, this is what you want when you put it down on the calendar that you're going to have this thing go down, you're going to have joint practices go down. And also, too, just even like a bit of a surprise factor, like who would have thought that the Raiders would be giving the keys to the facility essentially to the Patriots at any point?
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, definitely, you know, living in a bit of bizarro world. But speaking of, for those of you that are listening to the audio version of the show, in just a little bit, Jesse and I are going to take a water break, and we're going to play our interview with Tamara Brown, who covers the Patriots for Patriots.com. And it was great to kind of get the other side of just the spectrum a little bit and kind of see her reactions to Allegiant, her reactions to this beautiful facility, kind of her take on what we've seen the past couple days. So if you're watching on YouTube, you won't see that. But if you are listening on the Raiders Podcast Network, make sure you hang out with us, and Jesse and I will get to that in a little bit. But my big takeaway was really the same as yours, where I think the mentality and kind of the way in which both these teams went about business, I don't want to say was surprising, right? Yeah. Because you look at a Bill Belichick-led team, you look at a Josh McDaniels-led team, the one thing that we both know that they're going to share in common, disciplined, very business-like approach to work. And that's what we saw. Now, going back to a year ago, and I'm not saying that there was not that approach, but those 2 days in LA were wild. Yeah. Wild in really entertaining, fun ways, and in ways that, you know, in hindsight, you wish were not, right, with the having to call the second practice day a bit early. But for me, seeing both these teams go about business for 2 days in such a professional manner, in such a way of like, yo, we're here to work, we're not here to do anything else. I think, like I said, surprising is the wrong word, but it's something that really stood out to me.
Yeah, I think, you know, essentially like they squeezed all the juice that they possibly could have out of these last couple of days, you know, and that's great. And, you know, everyone that's obviously followed along on social media, whether it's, you know, us and the media here in Vegas, the media from Boston, you know, they saw that the Raiders had a great first day. I don't think it was as drastic as a lot of the Boston reporters made it out to be, you know, they weren't like mopping the floor with them, but the Raiders looked really good. And I think that's something where they're kind of, again, like proving a point, like, hey man, like, you know, we're here. Like we're one of the teams in the you know, NFL that you got to look out for, and also kind of planting those seeds of doubt. Again, this is a long way down the road in December when the Pats do come back to town, but you don't think for a second that, like, you know, the guys that went up against Devontae or the guys that went up against Max aren't going to be thinking back to what happened over the last couple of days here. When those two guys, they showed that they're the top dogs on the team for a reason.
1,000%. And one thing that really stood out to me is talking to Eric Allen after the game on Saturday, and then talking to him throughout the past couple of days, is he was telling me, he goes, look, Devontae should look good. Yeah. Right? Like, he's Devontae Adams. It doesn't matter who you line up against him. He should look good. And he goes, But the thing to keep in mind is that they're even in or I guess technically late August now. He goes, there is 1,000% a chess game going on between Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels. What they want to show, what they're comfortable showing. He goes, look, the reality is Bill was showing defensively about as vanilla can get against the Raiders offense. As he should, knowing full well that in about 4 months, they're coming back to town to do this thing for real. So I think I don't want to dampen enthusiasm and dampen excitement in any way, shape, or form. Because to your point, did the Raiders look really, really good over the past couple of days? 100% they did. Did they look the way that we wanted and expected them to look? 1,000%. Now, let's take a step back, take a deep breath, and understand that Bill wasn't throwing the crazy matrix, the matrix blitzes. He wasn't going full Neo and being the one. There's kind of levels to this, and the Raiders checked a box, a very major box, but I think it's important to remember to keep everything in context.
Exactly, and you have to do that throughout the entire preseason, specifically again this week, where, look, we could be sitting here saying the exact opposite, saying that they didn't check these boxes, that it's like, oh man, this team has some work to do, which obviously they still do, like every team does. But we could be sitting here saying, oh, man, the Patriots came in and dominated. That's not what we're sitting here saying. And then that's something that Raider Nation has to latch onto, regardless of the fact of whether it's preseason or not. They did have the extra week of training camp, that a lot of teams didn't have. But you look at the work that was done, good stuff, guys that flashed here and there, and we start to see this roster taking shape more and more. You got to see them go against different guys, different schemes, stuff that they didn't prepare for and have to adjust on the fly. And in doing so, they looked like they had a command of their system, both offensively and defensively. And that's massive to be able to say at this point in camp.
A completely new staff, a lot of guys learning a lot of new stuff. And to your point, I think that at the end of this season, whenever the season ends, hopefully it's going to be in, the second week of February, whenever it is. But I think that when we look back at kind of the story of this year, having that extra week of camp is going to be so important. We're going to look back look, the Raiders were able to get those 3, 4, 5 extra days in, get some work in, start stacking those bricks, insert football cliche here. Yeah. But I think that has been such an important kind of mini storyline to everything that we've seen throughout training camp, and ultimately that we'll see throughout the regular season. But we were talking to Tamara about it. The other side of this now is the joint practices are great. Everyone's super fired up. The Raiders are going to wrap up the preseason against said Patriots tomorrow night at Allegiant Stadium. And we still go into this preseason finale, Jesse Merrick, with no shortage of questions about this team. Now, do we have a lot more clarity on certain things than we did a week ago? 1,000%. But still big questions going into tomorrow night. And when you look at those big questions, what are the ones that stand out to you?
I mean, look, we've been talking about it all camp long, and I know it's not the sexiest one as we've talked about, but offensive line. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing that we've been following all along, and now some wrenches have been thrown into it a bit here. Illuminor's getting more work at right tackle. Again, I've found myself saying I shouldn't be surprised because to me, he has been the most impressive of those guys that are fighting for jobs. So seeing him get more work, Dylan Parham getting more work, those guys playing with the ones out there here against the Pats. And to me, I told myself going into it, the group that we see rolled out there, for these practices is probably who this coaching staff feels are their guys. So now, okay, let's see, because it seems as though that battle between Parham and John Simpson has really heated up at left guard, specifically at right tackle. Can Leatherwood rebound from a less than stellar performance against the Dolphins, and can Illuminor hold on to the position that he's been in? This is a guy we know versatility all the time, has played all across the offensive line. I want to see the guy lined up at center just to show you can do it. Yeah. That's the only position he hasn't played. So I think this staff really likes what they see in him. So let's see who lines up out there for this game, because I wouldn't be shocked if maybe we don't even see some of those guys now at this point. If we do, can they continue to build on what they've started right now?
And kind of just to follow up on that, another one, and it's admittedly not sexy, I understand that. Who's going to be your swing tackle?
Yeah.
Right? We haven't seen Brandon Parker in a minute. Josh McDaniels has understandably not given him too much away in terms of what his timeline looks like, nor should he in late August.
Yeah.
But understanding that Brandon Parker going into this year, it felt like from the outside looking in, if he didn't win that right tackle job outright, which he may very well have done, he was going to be your de facto swing tackle, right? He's played left tackle, he's played right tackle. It's up for debate, I think, how effectively you think he has done that, but he's been able to do it at a professional level. Who's going to be that guy now? Because if Illuminor is your starting right tackle, he can't all of a sudden be in two spots at once. So that to me is now, we talked about the numbers game a lot, right? You look at guys who have the versatility to do multiple things. How does that shake out? Because once again, I would be shocked if we saw Colton Miller tomorrow night.
Yeah.
So who's going to line up at left tackle? Do you move Jermaine to left tackle and give someone a shot on the right? Like that to me, and admittedly not the sexiest, flashiest thing, but really important jobs that are going to be won tomorrow night.
Yeah, I think also too with that in mind, we've seen Jermaine play at left tackle in lieu of Colton Miller in each of the games, and so. One thing that I point to, to your point about like it may not be a starter with that swing tackle position, I don't know about that. Because Josh noted, I remember, I wish I could tell you which interview it was.
Who knows?
One of them early on in camp, he was talking about those battles and swing tackle and whatnot. And he said, with the versatility and all that, it could be a starter that ends up moving. So if Jermaine is the guy that ends up starting, I think he's your swing tackle, regardless of whether or not he is the starter or not. And then they pop someone in there at right tackle if he has to move to the left. God forbid, let's hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So that's where I think maybe that is the case. I think they don't care, whether you're a starter or not. The guys are going to move around, and we've seen that throughout camp. They've thrown out 50 million different combos along that O-line.
And they've talked about, and they've been very steadfast in it. They talk about that top five, right? They're going to put the best 5 guys out there. Doesn't matter what the position versatility they have. We're going to put the best 5 offensive linemen that we have out there. Another one to keep an eye on, something you and I have talked about a lot. Who is going to win these wide receiver jobs? And there are no shortage of quality candidates. I think DJ Turner has, I don't want to say, completely earned a roster spot, but it feels like he's pretty darn close.
Yeah.
So who is going to, first off, how many numbers are going to be in that room? Who's going to win that last spot or 2 spots or possibly 3 spots? Someone's going to go out and win a job in that wide receiver room tomorrow night, though. I'm telling you that.
I mean, the ones we talked about so much, Keelan Cole, DJ Turner, and T. Billy. I mean, those are the 3 to really keep an eye on. And it's exciting because, again, we talked about it with the O-line. A lot of people don't like to talk about it because it's not flashy or whatever. Well, okay, the receivers are as flashy as it gets. These guys have big game. I think Keelan Cole is more one of those guys that slides under the radar just because everything he does, it doesn't, look like, oh, my gosh, but he's just consistent. That was one word I think you've used before when talking about him, and that's exactly the case with him. Whereas DJ and T. Billy, I think, are a little more explosive type guys. They have that speed element more so that you can see. I think Keelan just kind of glides, so he doesn't maybe look as fast as he actually is. But, man, I mean, that's the one that's, as a former receiver, I love watching those battles, just seeing all that play out. That's definitely going to be something to watch. And one thing, too, that I keep thinking as we've talked about this throughout the entire podcast, we don't talk about the defense a ton, but that's a good thing because there's not as much, up for grabs. I mean, there's some battles, in the linebacking core, Masterson and Darian Butler, which one of those guys is going to merge? Do they both make the team? Who knows? How many backers they keep? But, guys that have played very well in groups to watch and stuff. And that's where it's just man, I think you have to be excited if you're a member of Raider Nation that there's not this who's going to be, your number 2 guy at this position or that position. We walked in thinking, at corner that was going to be an area of weakness. Well, all of a sudden it's hey, not so fast. They've got some guys, a good solid 4 that I think they can be very comfortable with.
And I think just to give something a little under the radar to keep an eye on the defense, and you and I have talked about this a handful of times, your third rusher, right? Your third edge rusher, who's it going to be? I mean, you feel really, really good about Chandler. You feel really, really good about Max. The big fellas in the middle, Hankins, Bilal, you feel good about that. You're going to rotate. Who's going to be that third guy? Does Malcolm Kuntz really kind of rise up? Does he do enough to earn that spot? I mean, they are not the sexiest battles, and I completely understand that. But to your point, especially on defense, that is a really, really good thing.
It is. It's something that you just got to be feel steady about. You know, if you're a fan, where it's not oh man, who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? I think too, one of the easier answers I think is Kuntz. As that number 3 guy. And that's something where he's going to kind of continue that progression. I think he's made some strides, and also again working with Max again, bringing Chandler Jones in. That is only going to help this kid grow his game.
And I think one of the big aspects of this defense that I feel like maybe we haven't talked about them enough. I think you hit the nail on the head where we kind of feel good about what they're going to bring to the table, but everything that we've heard about Patrick Graham and from Patrick Graham is the adjustments, the mid-game adjustments, the week-to-week adjustments. And you're going pretty vanilla during the preseason.
Exactly.
We're not getting the exotic blitz packages. We're not getting these kind of wholesale philosophical changes from week to week to week, and nor should we. But I think that's really when we're going to learn. I would argue we're going to learn more about this defense between, from week 1 to week 4 100%. Than we will over the past 6 months.
Yeah, definitely. Because that's when the bullets are flying, when it's real. They're going to be running their real stuff, because, again, you don't want to show off all this stuff. You still want that element of surprise when you get to the first week of the season. And look, there's tape out there of what Patrick Graham does during the regular season. There's no doubt about that. But not with this team, with this personnel, with Max Crosby, Chandler Jones, all those different guys. that's the thing where it's going to be fun to see how that emerges. And that's why we maybe don't talk as much about the defenses because, again, it's so vanilla. It's more of that just like, hey, getting the technique down, working your way through a lot of those things. But there is still so many things that have been interesting to watch, the growth on that side of the ball. You mentioned Malcolm Kuntz, to take it back down to the D-line. I think this is a big week. Tomorrow is a big day, I think, for Clelin Ferrell. He's a guy we haven't seen, for a while throughout most of camp. He's back now. And it's one game. Obviously, practices are going to take more into account with that, but this is your chance to shine.
Yeah, and if you're Klee, right, I mean, you need to put your best foot forward in this final opportunity, right? And I think that one thing that has never been up for debate about Klee, an incredibly talented dude, a dude who has all the tools in the toolbox, and now in a new system, in a new scheme with Patrick Graham, let's see what you got.
Yeah.
Right? And I think Josh and Dave have been so open and transparent, and we've seen it play out in their actions where everyone comes in with a fresh slate, right? Doesn't matter if you're a first-round pick, if you're an undrafted guy, if you're somewhere in between. They are viewing and evaluating every single guy based on who they are. Doesn't matter, the number attached to you, what jersey, none of that. They're coming in and they're evaluating football players. And I think that is the best possible thing for Klee at this point. No preconceived notions about who he is, what he can bring to the table. Go out there tomorrow night, ball out, and let's see what happens later next week.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I'm curious to see where he lines up in different situations and stuff like that, because we've seen in previous years he slides inside, outside, things like that. So that's where I'm curious to see how this coaching staff views his ability and what opportunities they put him in to show, hey, this is what I can do.
And selfishly, and I know it doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot, I'd like to see the Raiders go undefeated in the preseason.
Yeah.
I'd like to see them start a little Baltimore Ravens-esque
Exactly.
streak. That thing's still alive, right? What are they, 22, 23, something absurd like that?
I want to say it's up to 23 now, I thought they said, which is insane. And look,
that's wild.
It doesn't mean anything, but it does at the same time. Because, look, would you rather him go 0-4?
Exactly.
So, I mean, look, there's something to be said about getting it done. At the end of the day, yeah, the result doesn't matter, but you still beat another team that was competing to try and win the game because they're all competitors, man. They all want to win, even though it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, but I also, you're 100% right. Where these stats don't go down in the NFL archives, but you try telling player number 52 on this roster this game doesn't matter. For him, it matters a lot.
Heck yeah.
It matters a lot, and it'll be a lot of fun to watch tomorrow night. Like I said, for those of you who are watching on the YouTube, Jesse and I are going to take a water break. For those of you that are listening on the Raiders Podcast Network, stick around because we're going to play our interview with our new friend from the New England Patriots. I know that sounds weird to say. Tamara Brown, who covers the Pats for Patriots.com.
SiriusXM gets you into every Raiders preseason game. Learn all about the team, plus hear your music, talk, comedy, and more. Subscribe now and get your first 3 months free. Get ready for some Raiders football.
And Jesse Merrick, we have come to our final segment of the Raiders Training Camp Podcast presented by SiriusXM. And as we kind of go out, as we get ready to embark on the regular season, I think let's take this moment. What have we learned, big picture, about this team in 2022 over the past, call it 4 or 5 weeks? What sticks out to you?
I mean, there's so many little things we could throw out there, players that stood out, stuff like that. I'm going to take more of a broad approach where with this new staff coming in, I wasn't sure, obviously coming in from New England and everything like that, how forthcoming information was going to be and things like that. To me, they've kind of told us things and then gone and done it. They talk about versatility being key. You look at the guys that have stuck around, guys that are getting opportunities. It's the guys that do the most things, the versatility that they have. I mean, look, they built this roster, and gotten rid of some pieces that didn't fit their versatility and what they're looking for and things like that, specifically along the offensive line. So for me, it's been kind of the honesty, in talking about different things with this roster and whatnot. They may not always dive into all the minutia and all the details that maybe some of us do want, but they'll tell you, hey, look, this guy's going to get this opportunity, whatever it is. Lester Cotton, that is one that kind of sticks out to me. We heard all the talk about it in OTAs and everything like that. And I think everybody's real hesitant. Well, they've been telling us since OTAs that Lester Cotton stood out to them. And if you look at everything we've seen throughout camp in the games, Lester Cotton's the guy at right guard. So that's just one thing to me that stands out is, one, good on Lester coming in fresh slate, doing his thing, but also this staff, telling you essentially hey, look, this is what we're going for, and it's not just talking around things, if that makes sense.
No, and I think very much the actions have followed up what we've seen and heard in the media sessions, right? And I think that's an important thing, and I think, to your point, we're all coming in fresh with Josh and Dave, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you guys are coming in a little bit differently than we are, but we're still all collectively learning. You and I have talked about that a lot, where we are going to learn so much about this group over the next, now 4 or 5 months, whatever it is. And we've learned a lot over the first 6, but we're just going to keep learning and learning and learning. And I think, to me, outside of the fact that they've been, kind of true to their word and really haven't tried to pull the wool over anyone's eyes in terms of what the expectations are, what they're looking for in terms of building a roster, my big takeaway is that, as we record on August 25th, Dave Ziegler and Josh have done a fantastic job putting a roster together.
Yeah.
Because come Tuesday, there are going to be some really, really, really tough decisions for those guys to have to make. And there have been years past where we were talking about this. There's been years past where we went into camp and you know who your receivers are. You feel pretty good about your offensive lineman. Your biggest question mark is who is going to be our backup nickel cornerback.
Yeah.
There's some really tough decisions that these dudes are going to have to make at the beginning of next week because the depth on this roster is better than we have seen in a really long time. I know we've harped on it a lot, but the wide receivers and the running backs in particular, I mean, just to go back to earlier this week, Kenyon Drake is objectively a really good football player. Like, no questions asked, a really good football player. And for whatever reason, he is not going to be, Dave decided he's ultimately not going to be a part of this program. So I think what I have learned is these guys have done a fantastic job building a roster. We are really close to the finish line in terms of seeing what that final product is going to be. But kudos to those guys, tip of the hat, for really, over this past 6 months, coming in, identifying what they needed, and doing it in a pretty major way.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I think has stood out about this staff is, like, the clear plan that they have in building that roster and doing that and creating things here. And they've been swift in all of their actions. You look at, on letting a guy like Kenyon go. I think that's, good on them for letting him go, to give him an opportunity to go find another team, not wait and keeping him around until these last round of cuts. A guy like DeMarcus Robinson as well, early on, let him go do his thing. They're willing to, I hate to say admit that they made a mistake, because I don't want to call those guys mistakes.
But I know what you mean.
You know what I mean? Like, they're willing to say, hey, look, this isn't, this fit's not working, or, we have some other guys that, jumped off to us that we think are going to be better fits, and they just move forward. It's not a hanging on or holding on. They're not worried about, fixing things and moving forward and, correcting, again, the word mistakes, I hate using it, but correcting the mistakes of previous regimes. They're okay with moving on, saying this is our plan, this is what we're going to do, boom, and it's done. There's no dilly-dallying. It's just going forward. So they have a very clear sense of identity, I think, of what they want in each different position.
That's perfectly said. And I think you bring up DeMarcus and you bring up Kenyon, and what rooms were those guys in? The wide receiver room and the running back room that we have talked about so much. And I think that, there to every action, there's an equal opposite reaction, right? So you have, you part ways with Kenyon Drake, and you do that because maybe you were pleasantly surprised by what you've seen from these rookies. Maybe you were pleasantly surprised by, Zamir is a little further along than you thought. Maybe Britton Brown flashed a little something that you weren't expecting to see in the preseason.
Yeah.
The wide receiver room. Hey, maybe T. Billy was a little more explosive than we anticipated when we saw him on tape. Like, there's so many, kind of stories within the story, and I think that the credit goes to the guys still in that room for making these decisions really hard.
100%. That's the thing, is you got to give it up to the players for doing that, because camp is hard, man.
Oh, dude.
I mean, to T. Billy, like, he's a guy I remember from day one of camp being like, oh, wait, hang on a second, and he has done that and caught people's eye throughout. There's plenty of guys who have done the same thing, but it's maybe not as flashy. We've talked about. But it's just like seeing the growth of guys like him. A guy like Zamir White, who we didn't see early on in camp, came on, popped, and has continued to do that. To me, it's also, you look at, they make the trade for Devontae, obviously lose the first and second round picks in that deal there. And they went and got some quality players. I mean, Parham, a guy, how many times do you see a rookie come in, especially along the offensive line, and play so many different positions and play it well and clearly earn the trust of the staff?
Very, very rarely. I mean, that was one of the things after the first preseason game, and not to build you up too much, I was like, that was, I think, the tweet of our collective evening, right? When you brought up the fact that, hey, this is a rookie who 7 months ago was playing at Memphis, and now he's out there rolling in the Hall of Fame game, going all along the interior of that offensive line. A huge credit to him for putting himself in that position, but a big shout out to Dave and Josh for identifying, like, this is a guy who who has the versatility that we want, that we covet, and can do a whole bunch of things. And the hope is he can do a whole bunch of things really, really well. But it is, I think you hit the nail on the head where you said there's an identity, right? Where Dave and Josh from day one have made it clear what their expectation is, what the goal is, and how they're going to get there. And now, over the past 4 or 5 weeks of training camp, over these first 3 preseason games, obviously you'll see one more tomorrow night, we've seen, maybe the mosaic isn't completely done yet, but it's pretty clear what they're going for and what it's going to look like at the end.
Oh, 100%. And I'm so curious to see, a couple days from now, come Tuesday, who are the guys that, as I got a program.
It happens. It happens.
Right down the tail end of this thing, huh? But I'm curious to see, how we see that vision come to life even more. There's obviously going to be some surprise names that don't make this team. We've already seen them, but there's going to be more as we move forward into here. So I'm just excited to see, that vision take place in the sense of this is our 53. This is what we're going into. And obviously that's going to change, throughout the year. But to see the final decisions that they make here and get rolling.
And I think the biggest compliment that we can give Dave and Josh at this juncture is that there's going to be a lot of guys who don't make this 53 that are going to have jobs in the NFL
100%.
24 hours later.
Yeah.
Right? And that hasn't always been the case. And that's not a shot at anyone. That's not saying anything bad about a previous regime. That's just reality. And I think that when we get the final roster on Tuesday and then we wake up on Wednesday and see who signed, I think there's going to be a lot of dudes on this team, who were on this team, and that are not going to be jobless for very long.
100%. And also, too, one thing to come out of these joint practices, there's going to be at least one Patriot that doesn't make their team that ends up here.
And vice versa, probably.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm curious who that guy's going to be.
Yeah.
And what moves are made, because there's going to be some surprise cuts, some vets, whatever, throughout the league. Who comes into the fold here? Those are the interesting parts where, I think I remember you noting it last year at this time, that it's a living, breathing beast, that roster, that 53, and it's going to continue to change, all throughout the year. And this is just the infancy of it. But we've been able to see it go from 90 guys, down to the 80 right now.
We're at 80 right now.
Down to the 80. But see the growth from all these guys, from OTAs, from now. I mean, it's been something that I think Raider Nation has to be very excited about.
1,000%. And just put it this way, as we kind of put a bow on our show for the year, Final Cut Day is on Tuesday. That's August 30th. The Raiders don't play a game until September 11th. So you better believe that the roster that we see next Tuesday, and we're going to get into it and dissect it and look way too much into it, there's going to be a few changes between now and week 1 against the Chargers. And that's the nature of the beast. That's what makes this league so exciting, because especially towards the bottom of that roster, the personnel moves, the crafty, how are we going to shift this guy here? How can we stash him here? Like, all those kind of games within the roster management world are going to be a blast to watch. And, dude, this has been a blast. Year 2 with us. We did it. We succeeded. It has been so much fun to do this. Shall we do it again in 11 months, 10 and a half months?
Let's do it, man.
Let's do it. I cannot wait. So, for the final time this summer, for Eddie Paskal, my man Jesse Merrick, Ray Behind the Glass, Alexandra, and a huge shout out to our video staff, Peyton and Stevie and all those guys who have added a really nice, unique element to the show this year. Going forward, building us out. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you to all of you guys who have listened, who have watched, who have sent Jesse and I kind comments on the Twitter.
Definitely.
It has been so much fun to kind of go on this journey together. And as crazy as it sounds, we are just starting.
I know, right?
We are just starting. So make sure you hang out with us for the rest of the year. Make sure you tune in with Jesse on News 3 throughout the entire NFL season. Hang out with us at Silver and Black Productions, and we will see you guys next time for our next iteration of the Raiders Training Camp podcast presented by SiriusXM.
SiriusXM gets you into every Raiders preseason game. Learn all about the team, plus hear your music, talk, comedy, and more. Subscribe now and get your first 3 months free. Get ready for some Raiders football.